There's a big brown cloud in the city, and the countryside's a sin, and the price of life's too high to give up. Gotta come down again. Worldwide war's over and done, and the dream of peace comes true. We'll all be drinking free bubble up, eating that rainbow stew.
Good day. Ever since a dying Englishman named Eric Blair, pen name George Orwell, wrote about a future police state in a novel called 1984, the phrase Big Brother is watching has frequently been invoked, either as a warning of a coming police state or a protest against existing government surveillance. That concern has been raised anew in recent months over plans by the Manchester Police Department to install cameras in the vicinity of City Hall to conduct a 24-hour, 7 days a week surveillance of Elm Street with a live feed to the dispatch office and police headquarters. Images captured by the camera may be stored for up to 14 days, the city's police chief told the city's board of mayor and aldermen, which approved the plan. Some citizens, however, including both residents and non-residents of Manchester, have argued that such surveillance constitutes an abuse of police power and an invasion of citizens' privacy. Gilles Bissonnette, legal director for the American Civil Liberties Union of New Hampshire, filed a petition for an injunction against the installation of the cameras on behalf of 4 plaintiffs, one of whom organized a rally against the plan and titled the rally 1984 is not an instruction manual. That plaintiff is with us today. Carla Gericke is a former president of the Free State Project, a former candidate for state senate, and is, as we're about to hear, an outspoken advocate of individual liberty and privacy rights. Welcome, Ms. Gericke. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let me begin by asking, what's wrong with having the cameras there so police can identify a culprit, someone who's breaking the law in plain sight on Elm Street, in plain sight, but out of the sight of a policeman because the police cannot be everywhere. What is wrong with having a camera there to help them identify and track down the criminal, the wrongdoer?
Well, I think you're asking the wrong question, first of all.
I do that a lot.
So I mean, there are several studies out now that say these cameras don't actually prevent crime. So one of the things we have heard from the city, and, I think everyone's heart is in the right place here. Everyone thinks, this can help. I've certainly talked to business leaders downtown who are like, we want these cameras because they're somehow going to help with small-time crime, they're going to help with drugs, and they're going to help with panhandling. Now, studies bear out that none of those things actually happen. To the extent that cameras have actually helped drop any kind of crime statistics, it has mostly been sort of tangential. It's the fact that there's better lighting usually. Sometimes they put up fences, and generally they'll put up signs saying this area is under surveillance. So we could probably save a lot of money and just put up the signs. So what's wrong with having these cameras?
Well, put up signs that says this area is under surveillance when there's no surveillance?
Well, so here's the thing, right? So if we have these cameras and they're only being fed to the police department, mm-hmm. So now we're centralizing information in the hands of one group. And you mentioned Orwell earlier, right? So this is that sort of idea of the big brother, right? And I feel like we're at the stage where I actually have to say big bad brother, because I'm not sure people even know that big brother is not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And I'm questioning whether people actually fully understand that free people in a free society are not surveilled 24 hours a day, no matter what the reason is. But I think in this case...
Well, no one would be surveilled 24 hours a day. The street would be surveilled 24 hours. Nobody's on the street. Well, there may be a few exceptions, but I doubt if most people are on the street 24 hours a day.
Well, we know that this opens up a can of worms, right? So first of all, we're going to start with these 3 cameras. We know that in every other place where they've introduced these cameras, it is a Pandora's box. It starts with 1, it starts with 2, it's 3, next thing it's 10. You'll see in cities like London and New York, it's pervasive, it's everywhere. So eventually it will become, and it has in London, for example, become that if you are in public, you are being surveilled. So that's certainly an issue. Now, some people will say, well, if you're in public, you don't have an expectation of privacy, right? And I think that is, somewhat of a legitimate argument, but certainly with the lawsuit that we filed in the case that I'm a plaintiff in, that's not the argument we're making, although I do think that's a strong argument, is that we should have the right to privacy, because this sort of surveillance society becomes this pervasive thing, and it has a chilling effect on people's behavior and all of that. But in this case, we're specifically very narrowly making an argument, and that is in New Hampshire, which I think is unique as compared to other states. I do think we have a better sense of we trust our citizens, and we're kind of like not police statey. And I actually moved from New York City to New Hampshire because I didn't like the cameras. I didn't like being searched on the subways. I didn't like all of that stuff. But in New Hampshire in 2006, they passed a law called Highway Surveillance Prohibited. For the nerds out there, the RSA is 236-130. You can look it up. And basically what that law says is if they use cameras to capture, not even to capture, if the cameras can capture a license plate or identify the motorist from the footage, then that is prohibited in New Hampshire. So we feel fairly confident that these cameras, if they're set up in downtown Manchester, they are going to capture, they are going to capture cars. They are going to capture motorists. And even in the city's pleadings, they admit that. They say, yes, we think we're going to inadvertently capture some of this, but oops, that doesn't matter. Now, of course, you can't actually claim to be for law and order and then say, well, the laws don't really apply to us. So in this case, we're specifically using that statute because I think on the face of it, if you look at the statute, what they're planning to do is pretty much prohibited.
Okay, yeah, I have a copy of RSA 236-130 here. It has...
So that was actually a very narrowly tailored bill.
Yeah, one of the things I wondered right away is why it was written to protect the privacy of motorists but not pedestrians on the street.
So my understanding, and I'm sort of speculating a little bit here, but based on conversations that I've had with legislators at the time, I think it was because people did not even fathom that the state would go so far as to say, not only are we going to use these sort of license plate scanners, and in 2006 when this came out, it was around about the time when all this like new tech came out. So it was the license plate scanners, it was like high definition cameras and everything. And as we know, when you're not paying your own bills, you're like, oh, these nice cool toys, let's try some of this. And so I think when they introduced the bill, it was because they wanted to surveil the roads, and the way it ended up being written was pretty much to be like, okay, we're going to let you do this in these very, very, very narrow instances. And the thinking was, we would never in New Hampshire allow people to just put up cameras and surveil the general public. And in fact, there's a great quote here. I have to put on my glasses, but Earl Sweeney, who was then the Department of Safety's assistant commissioner, in 2006, in the legislative history for this bill, said, some states, some police departments set up to monitor, for example, the downtown business districts to detect or deter burglaries, vandalism, and drug dealing. Since this is general use, if this bill, that Highway Surveillance is Prohibited bill, passes, we do not believe this usage would be allowed in New Hampshire without specific legislation at a future time legalizing it. So even the Department of Safety testified and said, no, we wouldn't use this to generally surveil people. And then he also, in 2013, in a follow-up in the Union Leader, he said, and I quote, the police can put up surveillance cameras in London. They can have a camera on every street corner, but that is illegal in New Hampshire if the license plate or the vehicle's occupants are identified. highway surveillance is prohibited, except for these narrow exceptions. And
Well, there are a lot of exceptions in the law. I mean, it runs about, page and a half anyway of the exceptions. The prohibition is set forth in paragraph 2. Neither the state of New Hampshire nor its political subdivisions shall engage in surveillance of any public ways of the state or its political subdivisions. That's clear enough. But then paragraph 3 says, this prohibition, or the prohibition set forth in paragraph 2, shall not apply where surveillance A is specifically authorized by state, or, here's the interesting part, I think, B is undertaken on a case-by-case basis in the investigation of a particular violation, misdemeanor, or felony.
Right.
So if someone is, if there's, let's say, a drive-by shooting, and the image of that vehicle and its license plate is captured on the video, that could be used in the
sure, but I
prosecution
think
of the
I
case,
think
right?
that language is talking about sort of Fourth Amendment in the same way, right? Under the Constitution, under the Fourth Amendment, which is like, A, we're not supposed to allow general surveillance. The Fourth Amendment, right, is search and seizure, right? Well, I mean, this stuff is a lot worse than search and seizure. But let's say, right, like under the Fourth Amendment, because the problem is, and here's the problem. Today, given the regulatory overreach of our government, right, every single person pretty much commits 3 felonies a day. There's a book that's been written on that. And so basically, the concern
that's an exaggeration, but
right, so the concern is, hey, we're going to collect this footage, and then if we don't like someone, we can back into a crime. We can prove you did something wrong, right? Because the minute you give someone too much leeway, we know it's going to be fraught with an abuse. And in fact, in the cities and towns that do have this level of surveillance, there is proof that it is abused. A lot of officers use this information to stalk partners. There's a sense of voyeurism. There are a lot of bad things that come with this sort of unfettered ability to surveil people for being in public. I mean, these aren't necessarily people who have committed crimes, right? Or take someone like me, for example. I mean, as you mentioned, I had a rally at City Hall called 1984 is Not an Instruction Manual. I have had, rallies over the years there with regard to the West Side lockdown, which was unconstitutional, went on for 9 hours after they had apprehended the suspect. All these things where there's this government overreach. So my question is, they put up the camera. I know they already don't like me. So am I going to go, do protests at City Hall anymore? Would I be able to get anyone to come out?
They could hardly charge you with a crime for holding a legal rally.
No, but it has a chilling effect, right? So part of it is Orwellian sense of how can we modify and control your behavior?
The argument often advanced is if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
Yes, I hear that all the time.
Do you know that is illegal?
Do you know that is a quote from Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, who was a Nazi? So when people start to quote Nazis at me to defend things that are clearly on the face of it, not something that we as a society and culture and Granite Staters should want, I'm a little skeptical. So if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? That's what they say. But what do you know if you don't even know what you're supposed to be hiding anymore? That's where it gets back to that 3 felonies a day and all of that. And the other thing is, you could address a lot of the business owners' concerns through decentralized approach, right? So a lot of these businesses actually do have CCTV cameras, right? And they do actually monitor their own spaces. And when there is a crime, the police generally will work with the business owners, and they've caught people that way. So the question is, why can't we continue with that approach where it's decentralized and actually makes all of us within our community work together and work with the police instead of creating this dark Orwellian thing with no oversight? They're going to start with facial recognition software, even if they say they're not going to, because we know they always overstep their bounds.
Mr. Bissonnette, your attorney argued in court, the city's scheme will inevitably and inherently cause officers monitoring the feed to identify motorists. Again, suppose there's a drive-by shooting. Wouldn't that be a good idea to identify the motorists and help the police apprehend them?
Well, the thing is, you have to, it's fine. You can come up with examples. I mean, I think that in that case, you could probably catch them through other forms, once again, with the decentralized business private cameras. And sure, maybe like in the off chance there's a drive-by shooting on Manchester's Elm Street.
Well, it has happened before. Perhaps only once, but it did happen once before.
And was that the one a couple of years ago?
No, it's longer. The one I'm thinking of was further back than that. But
did they catch the guy?
I don't know if they did. They didn't have they didn't have surveillance cameras then.
The point is, I mean, sure, I am actually willing to concede if we had 100% panopticon surveillance of everywhere in the world, yes, that would probably reduce crime. Is that the society you want to live in? I watch these sci-fi movies and stuff, and you watch this sort of dystopian future that is presented in something like The Hunger Games, right, where you have the Capitol and all the elites. This is the swamp, this is Washington, right? All the elites are concentrated there, and then you have these provinces, and, life gets worse the farther out you are. But in most sci-fi movies, which are supposed to sort of present some kind of idea of the future, and certainly George Orwell was pretty prescient, the question becomes, how did we create that society? And for me, part of it is saying, yeah, we're okay with one group of people saying, we want this technology that isn't available to any other person, and we are now going to say that we can surveil you, citizen, but you are not allowed to keep any secrets from us, but we are going to keep all the secrets, including things like the Lori's list, secret from you. So basically, we've had this topsy-turvy thing that happened where the state is not restrained anymore, we are not free, and we should say no to these cameras before we actually live in 1984.
Well, when you had that rally, and where was it, at City Hall Plaza? Mm-hmm. Okay. Was there a policeman there observing it?
Two policemen did come, and about 4 cars rolled by, yeah.
How is having a camera there any worse than having the live policeman there?
Well, you tell me.
No, I'm asking you, how is it, you don't object, do you, to having the policeman there?
Well, I mean, I think that, once again, with an officer who's just there observing.
Well, that's all a camera does, isn't it, is observe?
No, that's not just what a camera does. Do you understand that these are high-definition surveillance cameras that can zoom in, they can see in the dark, they can... now, Chief Capano, to his credit, said, we won't use facial recognition software. I believe he believes that true right now. I think the question would be in 2 years' time if that is actually the case. There are several cities in America that are now outright banning facial recognition software, and it's certainly something that we should look at if, in this case, we, don't prevail. I certainly hope we do. But the difference is, so now you have footage, right? Now you have facial recognition software. So let's say there were 40 people at the protest. So now you can go and you run it on your database, and you can actually personally identify every single one of these people. Then you can be like, I'm going to check their social media. Have they ever said something that we don't like? And if all of this sounds crazy, we know people are being arrested for words.
There's no law against saying something that the police or the government officials don't like.
But they're locking people up for that, Jack. Everywhere. A kid in New Hampshire spent 9 months in jail for making a very stupid joke at his graduation. He spent 9 months in jail for speech, an 18-year-old child.
Well, freedom of speech is not an absolute. Was it criminal threatening? What was it?
No, well, yeah, he made a joke about a gun. He didn't even own a gun. But the point is, if we're putting people in jail for 9 months, I mean, he prevailed in his trial, but his criminal, the prosecutor offered him 15 to 30 years for speech. Now, that's the one, most egregious case I found in New Hampshire. But if you're interested in this subject, go search for people being locked up all over America for speech. It's happening. This is why it is really, really important to say, what kind of future do we want to create? And I think in New Hampshire, we have a very unique state. I think Granite Staters are kind of a little different, and I can prove it to you. Because last year, we passed a constitutional amendment in this state that passed by 81%. That is a significant majority of people who agreed with the statement that says an individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private and personal information is natural, essential, and inherent. We have a right to live freely, free from government surveillance. I mean, I can't even believe that this is a debate. I don't even understand why we're talking about it.
The mere observance of someone isn't a intrusion in his private or personal information. I mean, you're not talking about seizing somebody's papers. You know, as the Fourth Amendment says, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, places, and effects.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to force us all that we just stay in our homes. I mean, yeah, that is the future that we are starting to create.
I doubt if anyone is going to stop going out on the street.
I won't do protests at City Hall anymore, because how am I going to get people who want to come? Who wants to come to something where they're giving the finger to the man, and the man's like, oh, let me run all of you through our database.
The New York Times a few months ago published an article entitled "Can 30,000 Cameras Help Chicago Fight Crime?" And the interesting story in there, I thought, was there was they found on their live video feed, someone shooting a federal agent, shot him 7 times. With their cameras, they were able, by switching from one camera to another, they were able to track that felon's route, and were eventually able to apprehend him and bring him to the bar of justice. Now, isn't that what law enforcement is supposed to do?
To protect their own at the cost of every citizen's constitutional rights?
Not just protect their own. I mean, it was the fact that the victim was a federal agent had nothing to do with it. It was the fact.
Well, you brought it up.
Well, I merely mentioned that it was a federal agent, but it was. No, they're there to protect anybody's right from being searched.
No, the Supreme Court has said clearly in 5 cases that the police have no duty to protect and serve citizens. Just to be really clear about the actual lay of the land.
That was in a case where they were trying to sue the police for negligence, for not effectively protecting somebody. But that is the reason that we have police, is to protect us all from being shot or robbed or mugged.
But none of this is going to actually prevent that. Yes, it might help after the fact, but don't make an argument that it's preventative.
Well, no. But if you apprehend the culprit, then you prevent that culprit from doing it again.
But I think you could, with basic policing, you could still do that. I mean, we solved crimes in the past before we had all this tech, did we not?
Chicago had more crimes, more homicides than than Los Angeles and New York combined, but only 1 in 5 homicides are solved. So, obviously, if you have a video of somebody committing a crime, you can more readily find them and apprehend them.
Okay, Jack, so are you making the argument we should have cameras everywhere? Because no one's going to go shoot someone on Elm Street anymore if the cameras are there, right? So you're saying if someone does, we have to have them everywhere.
I'm saying if someone does, then it's easier to apprehend them and bring them to justice. This is what law enforcement is all about.
So here was one of the arguments that the city made in the case at the trial. They said, well, cameras are ubiquitous, they're everywhere. So, hey, we should, we think I mean, they didn't say it quite this way, but we're kind of breaking the law, but you should let us do it because everyone's doing it. And in fact, in their pleadings, they did say there are these 5 other areas where they are currently surveilling in 5 other towns in New Hampshire where they put up cameras, right? So they didn't have someone like me who's willing to push back against this, right? So they're basically saying, well, we're doing it other places, so you should just let us do it here in Manchester as well. And I don't think this is the kind of future we want to create. We know that violent crime is actually going down. I know Manchester's had a rough couple of months, but generally speaking, all over the place, crime has been dropping. And so then it becomes, what is this trade-off in terms of being surveilled? We know, for example, also sorry, I wanted to make this point here, right? So we know that this is going to lead to abuse in cities that have a lot more diversity. We do know, and there are studies that have come out, that there's a lot of racial profiling that it's used for.
There was racial profiling with or without cameras.
Yeah, but don't you think it makes it easier?
I don't think so, no.
But you just said it makes it easier to solve crimes.
No, to apprehend the individual who committed the crime, not to profile somebody because he happens to be black or some other color.
But I mean, we do know these things happen.
Yeah, but
they're already happening. So do you think when you give someone more tools to do things...
More tools to apprehend the criminals, yeah.
But it's not just that. I mean, there's not one study that says these are more tools that are really helping to prevent or
I beg your
solve
pardon.
crimes.
In one particularly crime-plagued district of Chicago,
that study...
After the installation of the cameras, the incidents of shooting went down by 52%.
That neighborhood also went under radical gentrification, so let's not conflate all the data. And in the same city in Chicago, at the same time, they did a survey of 2 areas. And yes, you're correct. In that one area, it did go down. So yes, of course, that's the only thing they want to cite. But in the other area, where the same cameras and the same kind of policing was introduced, crime did not go down. So the question is, well, were there other factors, or was it the cameras? And certainly my reading of that, and there are various people who concur, it was because that particular neighborhood's flavor actually changed and it became a wealthier neighborhood, and so crime went down. They can't prove it was the cameras.
Okay, suppose somebody on Elm Street heaves a brick through a window. Suppose somebody mugs somebody. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be helpful if you had an image of that individual who committed that crime?
Yes,
Doesn't
and I
that
think
make it
that
easier
we
to
could
track somebody
sure,
down?
and those images should be captured privately by private citizens. It should not be under the auspices of the government.
What do we have
with
a police
no
force
oversight.
for? Do you think crime should be solved by private citizens?
I would love to see most crime, or a large chunk of crime, is actually now solved by private citizens.
Wasn't it a police camera that helped identify the perpetrator of the bombing at the Boston Marathon?
Was it? I don't know. I'm not familiar with.
I think it was.
I think it might have been private CCTVs, but I'm not going to argue on that because I'm not sure.
Well, there are obviously a lot of issues yet to be resolved in this ongoing controversy, and I want to thank Ms. Garrick for being here, and all of you for watching, and we'll see how this turns out as we get a ruling eventually from New Hampshire Superior Court in Hillsborough County. Thanks very much for watching. Have a great day.